At a $6 billion dinner, I was a ghost, until my boss, with a single icy sentence, blew the entire deal apart, leaving everyone, especially me, wondering why. The air in the private dining room was thick enough to chew. It smelled of old leather, expensive scotch, and the kind of quiet, suffocating ambition that could power a small city. I sat to the left of my boss, Robert Sterling, my portfolio resting neatly in my lap. Across the polished mahogany table sat the three men who held the future of our company in their hands. Mr. Harrison, the silver-haired patriarch of a global conglomerate, and his two protégés, Mark and David, who looked like they'd been born in tailored suits. This was it, the final dinner before signing the papers on a $6 billion acquisition. 6 billion. A number so large it felt unreal. From the moment they walked in, I was an inconvenience. Their eyes slid over me, a brief dismissive flicker before landing on Robert. Their handshakes were firm for him, and for me, a limp barely their brush of fingers. I was the only woman at the table, and the only person of color. To them, I was clearly just the assistant, the note-taker, the decoration brought along for reasons they couldn't comprehend. They had no idea that the revolutionary AI platform they were about to spend a fortune on wasn't Robert's brainchild. It was mine. I had spent 5 years of my life, countless sleepless nights, and every ounce of my intellect building it from the ground up. Robert was the brilliant CEO who saw its potential and gave me the resources, but I was the architect. The conversation began, and it was like I was behind a pane of glass. They talked about yachts, about summer homes in the Hamptons, about their golf handicaps. They spoke around me, through me, their bodies angled towards Robert, creating a closed circle of power. When the talk finally shifted to business, it only got worse. "So, Robert," Harrison began, swirling his amber drink, "we're impressed with the algorithm's predictive accuracy, but our tech guys have some concerns about scalability. How do you plan to handle the data load when we merge our systems?" Robert smiled and turned to me. "Evelyn, why don't you walk Mr. Harrison through the cascade protocol you developed? She's the expert here." I opened my mouth to speak, my mind already pulling up the relevant data points and stress test results. But before I could utter a syllable, Mark, the smarmier of the two protégés, chuckled. "With all due respect, Robert, let's stick to the big picture. We can have our nerds talk to your nerds later." He winked, as if sharing a clever joke. The word nerds hung in the air, a casual little grenade. I felt a hot flush creep up my neck, but I kept my expression placid. I'd faced this 1,000 times. The soft-pedaled condescension, the assumption that the technical details were somehow beneath them, and that I, by extension, was beneath them too. Robert's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly, but he let it slide. For $6 billion, you swallow a lot of pride. The dinner wore on like this. Every time Robert tried to bring me into the conversation, to give me the credit I deserved, they would deftly steer it back to him. They asked him about my code. They asked him about my data projections. They treated me like a ghost, a silent, invisible presence whose only job was to look pretty and not interrupt the important men. Finally, after the main course was cleared, I excused myself to use the restroom. The walk across the hushed dining room felt a mile long. I could feel their eyes on my back. I took a moment in the ornate, marble-clad restroom, staring at my reflection. I straightened my blazer, smoothed my hair, and told myself to hold it together. This was the final hurdle. I just needed to endure a little longer. When I returned, the atmosphere at the table had shifted. The forced joviality was gone, replaced by a strange, tense silence. Mark and David were staring intently at their water glasses, refusing to make eye contact. Mr. Harrison was attempting a nonchalant posture, but his knuckles were white where he gripped his fork. The most profound change, however, was in Robert. His face, usually warm and expressive, was a mask of cold fury. He was staring at the space right behind Harrison's head, his eyes narrowed to slits. He hadn't even noticed my return. The air crackled with unspoken words. I slid back into my seat, my heart starting to pound a nervous rhythm against my ribs. "Is everything all right?" I asked quietly, my voice sounding small in the heavy silence. Robert's head snapped towards me. The look in his eyes was one I'd never seen before. It was fiercely protective and absolutely livid. He didn't answer my question. Instead, he slowly, deliberately picked up his folded linen napkin, placed it on the table beside his plate, and looked directly at Mr. Harrison. His voice was quiet, but it cut through the tension like a shard of ice. "The meeting," he said, each word perfectly enunciated, "is over." A thick, stunned silence fell over the table. Mr. Harrison stared at Robert, his mouth slightly agape, the picture of a man whose reality had just been tilted on its axis. He'd spent his entire life in rooms where his money and his influence were the only things that mattered. He wasn't used to being dismissed. "Robert, now hold on," Harrison said, his voice a low rumble of authority attempting to reassert itself. "Let's not be hasty. Perhaps we've had a little too much wine. We're all gentlemen here." Mark and David looked like cornered animals, their earlier smirks wiped clean from their faces, replaced by a pasty white panic. They darted their eyes between Robert and Harrison, unsure of where the power now lay. Robert didn't even glance at them. He pushed his chair back, the legs scraping a harsh protest against the polished floor. The sound was deafening in the quiet room. He stood up, towering over the table. "Evelyn," he said, his voice still dangerously low, but his eyes locked on mine. "We're leaving." I was completely lost. $6 billion, the culmination of my life's work, our company's entire future. And he was walking away. Why? I scrambled to my feet, my portfolio clutched to my chest like a shield. I managed a tight, confused nod. As I followed Robert towards the door, I couldn't resist a glance back at the table. 3 of the most powerful men in the industry were staring after us, utterly dumbfounded. For the first time all night, I felt like I was the one with the power, even if I had no idea why. The walk through the restaurant was a blur. The elevator ride down to the parking garage was silent. Robert stared straight ahead at the brass doors, his jaw working, a muscle twitching in his cheek. My mind was racing, trying to replay the last few hours. What could I have possibly missed in those 5 minutes I was gone? Did they try to lowball him? Change the terms? It had to be something catastrophic. We got into his car, the scent of leather now feeling sterile and cold. He started the engine but didn't move. He just sat there, his hands gripping the steering wheel so tightly his knuckles were white. "Robert, what happened?" I finally asked, my voice barely a whisper. "What did they say?" He took a long, shuddering breath, the kind you take before delivering terrible news. He turned to me, and the fury in his eyes had been replaced with something else, a deep, profound disappointment. And shame. "After you left," he began, his voice raspy. Harrison was talking about the final integration phase. He said, "She seems bright enough, but is she really the one to lead it? Does she have the fortitude?" He was questioning you. I felt a familiar sting, but that wasn't enough to detonate a $6 billion deal. "And?" I prompted. Robert's gaze dropped to his hands on the wheel. "And Mark, that little prick." He laughed. He leaned in like he was telling a secret and said, "Come on, be serious. The code is brilliant, so Robert obviously had his top guys working on it around the clock." And then he looked around the table, smiled, and said the words I will never forget. He paused and I held my breath. He said, "Who invited her, anyway? I get it. She's a great little diversity hire. Makes the company photos look good. Good for optics. But let's not pretend she's the brains behind a multi-billion-dollar platform. The words hit me like a physical blow. It wasn't just an insult. It was a complete erasure of my existence, of 5 years of my life, of my very identity as a creator. Every single assumption I had felt from them all night, that I was the assistant, the token, the decoration, wasn't just in my head. It was real. They had said it out loud. Robert continued, his voice laced with venom. David snickered and agreed. Harrison didn't stop them. He just sat there and let them talk. They were laughing, Evelyn. Laughing at you. At the idea that you, a woman of color, could possibly have created something they wanted to buy. A cold, clear rage began to burn where my confusion had been. It was so pure, so intense. It felt like ice in my veins. They hadn't just insulted me. They had fundamentally misunderstood the entire situation. They thought Robert was the prize and I was the accessory. They had no idea that without me, there was no platform. There was no algorithm. There was no deal. I looked out the window at the glittering city lights, but I wasn't seeing them. I was seeing lines of code. I was seeing a rival company, Omnicorp, whose brilliant, forward-thinking CEO, an Indian woman named Anjali Sharma, had been trying to poach me for a year. She saw me. She knew exactly what I was capable of. I pulled out my phone. Robert looked over, a question in his eyes. "They think they just lost a $6 billion deal," I said, my voice steady and hard as diamond. I opened my contacts and found her name. "They're about to find out it was 12. Robert stared at me, then at the phone in my hand, a slow, predatory grin spreading across his face. It was the look he got right before a hostile takeover, the look that had made him a legend on Wall Street. The disappointment was gone, replaced by the thrill of the hunt. He understood immediately. We weren't just walking away from a bad deal. We were walking into a better one, and we were going to burn the bridge behind us so spectacularly it would be talked about for years. "Call her," he said, his voice a low growl. "I'll handle the press." My fingers flew across the screen. Anjali Sharma picked up on the second ring, her voice crisp and alert despite the late hour. "Evelyn, is everything all right?" "Everything is perfect, Anjali," I said, a newfound confidence surging through me. "I'm calling about your offer, the one from last year. Is it still on the table?" I could almost hear her smile through the phone. "For you, Evelyn. Always. But I thought you and Robert were finalizing the Harrison deal tonight." "Plans change," I said smoothly, meeting Robert's eyes in the dim light of the car. "Let's just say a difference in corporate culture became apparent. We're looking for a partner who values their assets, all of their assets." "I see," Anjali said, the understanding dawning in her voice. "My jet will be on the tarmac at Teterboro at 6 a.m. We'll fly to Seattle. My board is ready. Send me your proposal." "It's already in your inbox," I said. "And Anjali, it's not just me. Robert and the entire platform are part of the package now. Think bigger." There was a sharp intake of breath on the other end of the line, followed by a low whistle. "Evelyn Reed, you never fail to impress me. I'll see you in the morning." The call ended. For a moment, Robert and I just sat there, the engine humming, the possibilities hanging in the air like electricity. We had just set fire to our own company's biggest achievement, and it felt incredible. It was liberation. The next morning was a whirlwind. While Robert was fielding frantic, panicked calls from Harrison's office, calls he let go straight to voicemail, I was on a private jet, sipping excellent coffee, and finalizing a new, far more ambitious merger proposal with Anjali Sharma. She didn't talk around me. She didn't dismiss my technical explanations. She leaned in, her eyes sharp, asking intelligent, probing questions that showed she not only understood my work, but respected it deeply. By the time we landed in Seattle, We had hammered out the framework of a $12 billion deal. Omnicorp wasn't just acquiring our platform. They were merging with our entire company, with me and Robert taking on senior executive roles. It was a true partnership. The news broke just as Harrison and his team were probably sitting down for a crisis breakfast. The headlines were brutal. Sterling AI snubs, Harrison Global in shock last-minute pivot. Omnicorp announces landmark 12B merger, poaching tech world's hottest property. The financial news channels went wild. Harrison Global's stock plummeted by 15% in pre-market trading. They hadn't just lost a deal. They had been publicly humiliated, outmaneuvered by a company led by a woman they would have dismissed just as easily as they had dismissed me. But the real satisfaction came a week later. Robert and I were in the Omnicorp boardroom, a bright, airy space filled with a diverse team of men and women celebrating the finalized deal. My new phone, an upgrade courtesy of Omnicorp, buzzed with an unfamiliar number. Curiosity got the better of me, and I stepped out to take the call. Ms. Reed? Dalit. The voice was strained, defeated. I recognized it instantly. It was Mr. Harrison. This is she, I answered, my voice cool and professional. He cleared his throat. I just wanted to express my profound regret for the misunderstanding last week. My associates, Mark and David, they were out of line. Their words did not reflect the views of our company. They have been let go, for the record. A misunderstanding, I repeated, a small, humorless laugh escaping my lips. Mr. Harrison, it wasn't a misunderstanding. It was a moment of absolute clarity. You showed us exactly who you are, and we believed you. Your corporate culture cost you $6 billion. There was a long silence on the other end. I could hear the hollow sound of his breathing. He had lost, and he knew it. He knew it wasn't just about the money anymore. He had been judged, weighed, and found wanting. You're right, he finally whispered, the arrogance completely gone from his voice. And it cost me more than that. It cost me my reputation. I didn't offer him absolution. I didn't say it was okay. I just said, yes, it did. Goodbye, Mr. Harrison. And I hung up the phone. I stood there for a moment, looking out the panoramic window at the Seattle skyline. I didn't feel vengeful. I didn't feel angry anymore. I just felt seen. I walked back into the boardroom, where Robert raised a glass of champagne to me. Anjali Sharma put a hand on my shoulder, her smile genuine. To our new chief technology officer, she said, her voice ringing with respect. And in that room, surrounded by people who saw my value not as a box to be checked, but as the core of their future, I knew I was exactly where I was supposed to be.